The cold plains of Virelia stretched endlessly beneath a sky cracked with distant nebulae and the faint gleam of twin moons orbiting far above the horizon. Their light diffused through the storm clouds of crystallized dust that made the air shimmer with iridescence. Sergeant Kael Ryen adjusted the seal of his helmet, exhaling a breath that clouded against the inside of his visor before the suit's climate system wiped it clean. The signal had come through unexpectedly, an anomalous frequency, buried under layers of encrypted interference, bouncing erratically across abandoned satellites and fractured comms arrays, undetected by drones but caught by his ship's deteriorating passive scanner, which Kael still maintained out of sheer habit. A soldier's instinct not yet dulled by the ceasefire or by months of aimless salvage duty on a moon no one cared to remember. Virelia had once been a flashpoint in the war between Earth's coalition and the Zyria Dominion, but after the treaty was signed, it was designated as neutral, unclaimed space, uninhabitable by most, haunting to all. It was a wasteland of forgotten wreckage and echoing memories, where the only company was the ghostly wind and the metallic skeletons of once glorious machines. Kael had come alone in the crawler, half-tank, half-scout ship hybrid, equipped, with only what he could scavenge from ruined stations, kept alive more by experience than by reliable tech. He'd assumed the signal was a remnant of a broken AI loop, some leftover protocol from an old Zyrian war drone or beacon. But as he followed it deeper into the ice valleys, the tone began to shift, modulating into a pattern, pulsing almost, like breath, like a heartbeat fighting to be heard through rubble and silence. He found the source beneath a collapsed ridge, where jagged spires of transparent rock pierced upward like frozen lightning, and within their sharp embrace rested the fragmented husk of a Zyrian scout vessel, its curved design half swallowed by the snow shimmering faintly with bioluminescent etching, organic tech, pulsing dimly, as if remembering life. Kael's boots crunched through the frost as he approached, weapon holstered, hands wary. The outer hull was warped, but intact, its symbol of the crescent throne barely visible beneath layers of ice. He pressed his palm to the surface, feeling the low thrum of life support, still operational somehow. The entrance was sealed, responding, only to Zyrian biometrics, but Kael had learned to adapt. He activated his fusion cutter and began melting the seam along the emergency port, steam hissing as metal gave way with slow reluctance. When the hatch opened, the heat inside struck him like a fevered breath, stale and cloying, filled with the faint scent of ozone and something floral, alien. Inside was chaos, cracked glass, splintered bone-like supports, crushed interior panels, still glowing faintly with pale lavender light. But what caught him was the sound, a soft, rhythmic clicking, almost like whimpering. He stepped over shattered equipment and followed it toward the rear chamber, where a biosphere pod had collapsed inward, its protective gel leaking across the floor. And there, huddled in the remnants, was a child. Her body was small, curled, tight into itself, her skin a pearlescent sheen of blues and silvers, veins glowing like rivers of starlight beneath translucent flesh. Her hair, if it could be called that, floated around her head like strands of light, responding to his movement even before her eyes did. She looked at him, wide-eyed, violet orbs reflecting 1,000 fears, and clutched something tightly, to her chest, a crystalline medallion wrapped in her tiny fingers, its core pulsing with protective shielding. She did not speak, but the air shifted with the hum of telepathic tension, as if she was trying to read him, to determine whether he was threat or salvation. Kael didn't move closer immediately. He knelt down slowly, helmet retracting to reveal, his face weathered and calm, marked by the years of battle and the lines that loss always etched deeper than age. "You're safe now," he said, unsure if she could understand, but speaking anyway, because tone sometimes mattered more than words. The girl blinked once, then twice, and her grip loosened just slightly. That was enough. Kael wrapped her in his emergency cloak, its thermal lining activating as it detected her body temperature, which was far below survivable levels. She shivered against him, her body light and trembling like some fragile creature carved from glass. Kael carried her back to the crawler with urgency but not panic, moving with the efficiency of someone who had carried wounded soldiers through firestorms and pulled comrades from collapsed bunkers. But this was different. This was a child, an alien, alone, and she'd been there for what could have been days or weeks or longer, alive only because of the failing shield that now sputtered with each breath she took. As the crawler roared to life and cut across the icy plains, Kael scanned every comms channel he could, finding nothing. No bounty alerts, no search parties, no interstellar flares. Which made no sense. A Xerian vessel, even a minor one, especially one carrying a youngling, should have been priority alpha for the Dominion, unless they didn't know. Or didn't want anyone to know. The implications unsettled him. He tried speaking to the girl again, but she remained silent, gaze fixated on the medallion, which flickered and surged with inner light whenever he grew too distant, as if it sensed her fear. But by the third day she had eaten the rations he offered, carefully, slowly, and on the fourth, when they reached a repair station orbiting one of Virelia's dead satellites, she reached out and touched his wrist, one fingertip glowing faintly as she pressed it to his pulse. A soft echo bloomed in his mind, not words, not thoughts, but emotion, safety, warmth, fragile hope. She trusted him. Just enough. He hadn't reported her, and he wouldn't. He'd seen what the Coalition did, with anomalous asset, how children became tools and how gifts were rebranded as threats. If the Xerians didn't claim her, someone else would. And Kael couldn't allow that, not after what he'd seen in her eyes. He named her Nova, not for the destruction, but for the brilliance that survived it. She would be safe. Somehow, he would see her home, even if it meant trespassing into forbidden space, even if it meant being hunted, even if it meant becoming a traitor to a peace built on fragile silence. She had no one else. And though he didn't yet understand why the medallion reacted to her, why her presence triggered dreams he couldn't remember, or why sometimes, when she fell asleep, the stars outside the viewport seemed to bend and pulse. In sync with her breathing, he knew that this wasn't chance. It was destiny, written in a language only the heart could decipher. And he would not fail her. Kael Ryen had piloted dropships through asteroid fields and led tactical strikes against orbital dreadnoughts, but navigating a route through the forbidden corridors of Xerian-controlled space while harboring their lost royal heir was a gamble so reckless even he could barely justify it to himself, let alone to the blinking warning logs that flashed across his console like silent protests. The old carrier he flew, patched with stolen panels and second-hand tech, groaned through every warp jump like a wounded animal defying death, its fusion core stabilized only by Nova's mysterious medallion, which now nested in the heart of his ship's reactor like it had always belonged there. The artifact didn't just power the failing systems. It reshaped them, coaxed them to life in ways no human science could explain, realigning gravity fields, restoring oxygen filtration, even projecting navigational charts from memory Kael never installed. At times, Kael caught himself staring at the console lights with a mixture of awe and suspicion, wondering if he was still the one flying the ship or simply being guided by something far older, far smarter, and infinitely more determined. Nova spent most of the voyage in the observation deck, a repurposed cargo bay with a wide port window, where the stars stretched like rivers and galaxies glimmered like droplets on black silk. She never spoke in words, but her presence pulsed through the ship like a heartbeat Kael had come to depend on, a strange psychic tether that gently brushed his thoughts, like a child testing the corners of his memory. She had begun to draw, sketches in the condensation on the walls, glowing sigils with her fingertips that faded moments after she traced them. Kael didn't understand them, but they felt intentional, like maps from a language that lived in spirals and light. He asked her once what they meant. She looked at him and blinked slowly, and for a moment Kael felt not her voice but her memory. An image of a crystalline tower, hovering above a sea of clouds, the air filled with songs that resonated in the bones, and a woman cloaked in living metal, her mother, Kael realized, lifting Nova into her arms as the sky fractured with explosions. That was the moment the escape pod launched. That was the moment she was torn from home. Kael staggered. Back breath caught in his chest. The medallion was not just a key, not just a battery. It was a living fragment of her genetic memory. A guardian tether to the Xyrian crown, imprinted to protect her until she returned. Which meant two things. First, that she was not only important, but irreplaceable. And second, that others were certainly looking for her, others who may not be as kind. By the 6th day, Coalition patrol signals had begun to spike across fringe sectors. Kael rerouted through abandoned wormholes, dark drift fields, and collapsed star lanes that hadn't been mapped in decades. He used old war maps etched into the neural lining of his armor, bypassing official jump points and refueling in rogue ports where bribes were more valuable than credentials. Still, they were followed. It began with an empty ship, cloaked and scanning from a distance. Then 2. Then 3. Kael adjusted their shielding protocols, but the medallion resisted cloaking. It wanted to be found, but not by the wrong hands. In the neutral zone of Delta Virios, Kael and Nova were ambushed by scavenger drones, reanimated battlefield machines, repurposed to hunt artifacts and living tech. Kael fought them off with grim efficiency, but Nova, in a moment of terror, unleashed a shockwave that turned the nearest drone to molten slag. Her eyes glowed, hair rising like fire, and for a heartbeat, Kael saw the outline of something larger within her, a creature of immense potential, barely contained by the limits of her small form. Afterward, she collapsed, and Kael carried her back to the ship with trembling arms, whispering that she was safe, that he wasn't afraid. Even as his mind raced to grasp what he'd seen, they had just passed the outer edge of the Sarin cloud when the medallion flared so brightly, it shut down the ship's lights entirely and projected a star map Kael had never seen. One marked with a single glowing crest, the sigil of the Xyrian High Crescent. It pulsed once, then folded itself back into Nova's hands, who looked up at him with eyes full of quiet purpose. "That's where you're from, isn't it?" Kael murmured, already setting coordinates. The journey took another 2 days. Longer because of the unstable warp currents and Kael's insistence on running ghost mode to avoid detection. During that time, Nova began to speak. Not in sound, but through shared vision. He saw flashes of her mother's voice, of rooms made of floating light, of creatures with no mouths that communicated through harmonic resonance. He saw her homeworld, Xyrian 4, cloaked in layered atmospheric rings that shimmered with solar dust, its capital city grown from crystal trees and living architecture. And then he saw the fear. Nova in a stasis pod hidden by panicked hands, the queen crying as the medallion was pressed to her daughter's chest, and the pod ejected into space. War had come not from humans this time, but from within Xyrian factions, the queen's power challenged by an exiled bloodline hungry for the throne. Nova had been targeted not by accident, but by design. Kael understood then. This wasn't just a rescue. It was a return that could stabilize a fragile empire or unravel it. When the ship finally breached the outer orbit of Xyrian 4, the reaction was immediate. A royal fleet of silver-armored vessels emerged from cloaked orbit, surrounding Kael's ship with precision and silence. Communications channels lit up with alien frequencies, and the medallion responded, pulsing in waves that rippled through the ship's systems until the Xyrian signature aligned. The alien voice that answered was deep, resonant, unearthly calm. "Vessel, you carry the blood of the crown. Power down. Surrender the child." Kael glanced at Nova. She had taken his hand, eyes steady. He did not power down. "I'm not surrendering her," he said, knowing full well the translator wouldn't carry tone. "I'm bringing her home." A pause followed, long enough for Kael to imagine the worst, but instead of destruction, a beam of light enveloped their ship, and he felt the gravitational signature of a Xyrian transport lock seize the hull. Moments later, they were no longer alone. Kael and Nova were taken aboard the Celestia Crown, the Xyrian capital vessel and the largest living ship in known space. Its interior was a cathedral of bioluminescence and psychic architecture, its walls breathing like lungs, its pathways unfolding in fractal patterns that adjusted with every step. The crew wore robes of woven plasma, their eyes glowing like moons, their movements more like water than motion. And at the center of the throne hall stood Queen Orenya, taller than Kael expected, her presence both terrifying and tender, her voice echoing not just through the room, but through the very marrow of his bones. She saw Nova and dropped to one knee, arms open, weeping, not as a monarch, but as a mother reunited with her heart. Nova ran into her embrace without hesitation, and Kael turned away, his task complete. But before he could be dismissed, guards stepped forward, not in aggression but in reverence, and the queen raised her hand. "You," she said in a language Kael somehow understood, "have carried my child through shadow and fire, across the gulfs of war and silence. What would you ask of the throne?" Kael, exhausted and worn, simply shook his head. "Nothing," he replied. "Just let her be safe." The queen tilted her head, and a smile broke through her tears. A smile filled with galaxies. "Then you will be given more than you asked for," she whispered, "for you have already given everything." Time flowed differently aboard the Celestia Crown, as if the ship itself existed in a corridor where memory and moment folded together. In seamless silence, and for the first time in years, Kael Ryen felt unbound by the demands of gravity, war, or the burdens he had long buried beneath duty. The corridors whispered in a language of living light, responding to thought and emotion rather than command. And everywhere Kael turned, he felt not the cold scrutiny of military analysis, but the warmth of psychic reverence, a recognition that he, a mere human soldier once discarded by his own chain of command, had carried within him something sacred. Not only Nova, the heir, but the quiet, relentless will to protect without expectation, to love without language. He spent his first hours in what the Xerians called the atrium of memory, a chamber suspended in open starlight, where fragments of history bloomed like petals in the air, responding to the thoughts of those who entered. Here, Kael was shown visions, not through holograms or data feeds, but through feeling. The rise of the Crescent Throne in ancient times, its great diaspora across the galaxies, the interwoven tapestry of biology and crystal tech that made their civilization both organic and eternal. He saw Orenya not as a queen, but as a daughter once herself, raised among giants of light, burdened too soon by the deaths of her own kin during the first sundering. And he saw her now, a ruler clinging to hope, her people fractured by political betrayal, her crown still glittering but her heart ragged from exile, war, and the pain of a daughter thought dead. Nova's return had shaken the empire. Her survival proved the old prophecies true, that the heir bearing the soul key medallion would be the one to unite the divided houses and end the fracturing of the psychic lattice that kept their species bonded. Yet Nova was only a child, and Kael, to his surprise, had not been dismissed or imprisoned, but elevated, quietly, without ceremony, into the company of the Queen's inner circle, given a residence within the crystalline gardens of the upper rings and outfitted with a translator helix that allowed him to comprehend the harmonics of Xerian thought. He watched from afar as Nova began her integration rites, undergoing healing rituals in spheres of living mist, her body now visibly stronger, her eyes luminous with clarity. She smiled more now. She laughed sometimes, chasing gravity-defying blossoms through the arboreal chambers, and when Kael was near, she always reached for his hand, not because she needed to, but because she wanted to. That touch had become his anchor. And still, something in Kael remained restless. A soldier's instincts do not die with peace. They simply shift form. It was in the way the guards flinched when Nova's power flickered uncontrolled. It was in the way certain council members avoided meeting Kael's eyes. And it was in the way Queen Orenya, though gracious and serene, often studied him as though calculating an equation whose answer continued to evolve. Then, on the 7th day, the Queen summoned Kael to the Spire of Echoes, a slender tower grown from refracting crystal, suspended miles above the planet's surface, its walls made of harmonic lenses that turned even a whisper into song. There, she stood alone, her robes shimmering like starlight underwater, her hands bare, unarmed, as if offering truth before politics. "You see it, don't you?" she said without preamble, her voice less formal than usual. The fracture in the silence, the storm behind the light. Kael nodded once, not needing clarification. Someone doesn't want Nova to ascend. More than one someone, Orenya admitted, stepping toward the edge of the spire where the galaxy stretched like a canvas of fire. The House of Rel, exiled, broken but not defeated. They seek to implant doubt into the telepathic lattice, to fracture our unity before it stabilizes. If Nova bonds to the core stone before her 13th cycle, she becomes more than air. She becomes anchor, the mind-heart of our species. That is something our enemies cannot allow. They know she trusts you. "They'll use that," Kael murmured. "Or target it." Orenya's gaze did not flinch. "Both." That night, Kael did not sleep. He patrolled the outer gardens where Nova slept in her biosphere, watched over by dreamkeepers and surrounded by glowing fauna that shifted in response to emotion. She lay still, her breathing synced to the rhythm of the medallion, which now pulsed with celestial complexity far beyond anything Kael had seen before. He reached out not to touch but to guard, and the moment his fingertips neared the dome he felt it, a warning ripple of presence, something other, slithering along the edges of perception like a memory trying to hide. He turned, hand on his sidearm, but nothing was there. The next day, an assassination attempt unfolded in silence. A song blade hidden in a gift of woven light, triggered psychically to explode in pattern when touched by the air. Nova survived only because she hesitated, turning to glance at Kael before accepting the offering. That glance, that delay, gave Kael time to tackle her out of reach just as the blade unfolded into a spiral of pure plasma. He took the burn to his back, a glancing wound, but Nova was unscathed, clutching him as guards rushed in, too late. Queen Orenya stood over him moments later, her face a mask of fury barely contained by formality. Her psychic call echoing through the minds of every citizen across Zirian 4. "My daughter lives, but our enemy walks among us." In the hours that followed, Kael lay in a recovery cradle, his wound sealed with Zirian biocrystal that hummed against his skin like a second heartbeat. Nova remained by his side, holding his hand as she always did, her eyes no longer innocent but aware. "You saved me again," she said, not with words, but with thought, projected into Kael's mind like a memory gently placed. "Always," he replied aloud, meaning it with a depth he hadn't realized until now. When he awoke again, the Queen stood at the foot of his bed, flanked by her advisors. She dismissed them with a gesture and approached, holding something in her hands. A crown, small and unfinished, formed of starlight and crystal, humming with raw potential. "Nova has chosen her anchor," she said quietly. "It was supposed to be another child, one of her kind, one born of the old lines, but she chose you." Kael sat up slowly, wincing as the biocrystal shifted across his wound. "I'm not Zirian." "No," she agreed. "You are something rarer. A soul unbound by politics, a protector forged in grief, a bridge between what we were and what we must become." She held the crown forward and it pulsed once, reacting to Kael's proximity. Not claiming him, but acknowledging him. "You saved my daughter. You gave her peace. And now," she said, voice shaking just slightly, "I must ask something greater of you, not as queen, as a mother." Kael didn't speak, didn't breathe. The air seemed to still. "When Nova begins the rite of ascension," Orenya continued, "she will need someone beside her to share the burden of anchoring the psychic core, someone she trusts absolutely. If she does not succeed, her mind will shatter. If you join her, you may never be human again." Kael looked at Nova, who now stood in the doorway, not a child, not quite a queen, but something beautifully between. Hope, wrapped in starlight, power wrapped in kindness. She reached for him and he, without hesitation, took her hand. If it's her path, he said, voice hoarse but steady, then it's mine too. The rite of ascension did not begin with ceremony, but with silence, a silence so vast and complete that even the stars seemed to dim in reverence as Xirion forestilled, its people pausing as one to witness the moment when their future would rise or collapse into void. Deep in the heart spire, a living mountain of crystal-veined stone that housed the ancestral lattice of Xirion consciousness, Nova stood at the threshold of the core, the ancient chamber that no outsider had ever entered, her small form cloaked in woven rays of memory and light, her eyes luminous with starlit certainty as she held Kael Ryen's hand in her own. The journey here had taken only minutes, yet it felt like lifetimes since the moment they had first met. On that ruined moon, in the wreckage of fear and flame, when she was only a lost girl with eyes full of galaxies and he was a soldier trying not to care, now their bond had become the axis on which a civilization turned, and the queen herself, cloaked in ceremonial flame, stood behind them with the Council of Three and the Chorus of Thought, all watching with held breath as Nova and Kael stepped into the core together. Inside, the chamber was alive with pulse and memory, its walls breathing in waves of psionic light, ancient and aware, the minds of ancestors humming in low reverent tones like a choir submerged in the ocean of time. The air was thick with presence, not voices but impressions, echoes of all who had come before, all who had died to protect this place, this connection. At the center of the chamber hovered the core stone, a sphere of infinite depth and shifting form, as if it contained the entire universe folded inward upon itself. It rotated slowly, projecting lines of thought, memory, blood, and power through the crystalline veins of the room, and the moment Nova approached it, the sphere responded with a slow blooming of radiant gold. "This is it," Kael whispered, though he did not know if he was speaking to Nova or himself. Nova turned to him, her expression neither childlike nor royal, but something purer, truth incarnate, glowing from within. "I need you," her thought came, not just in his mind, but in his very bones. "You're the only one I trust enough to hold me through it." He nodded. There was no other answer. Together, they stepped into the light of the core stone. Instantly, Kael felt himself ripped from physical space, not in pain but in a sudden overwhelming expansion, as though he had become untethered from matter, his thoughts unraveling across memories not his own. He saw fragments, Nova's laughter in a floating garden, her mother's tears as the escape pod launched, the war-torn skies of Xirion during the betrayal, the first queen's awakening thousands of years ago, and beneath it all, the primal hum of the Xirion lattice, an unbroken psychic thread woven through generations. And into that thread, Kael was being stitched. He should not have been able to survive it. His mind was not built for this communion, not shaped to carry the infinite weight of a species' soul. But Nova was there, a steady light beside him, anchoring him as much as he was anchoring her, and together they reached the center of the core stone, a place not of space, but of convergence. There Kael saw it all, the factions conspiring in the shadows, the corrupted heirs still seeking to fracture the unity, the ancient breach in the lattice caused not by war, but by grief, a psychic wound carried forward for millennia. Nova reached out and Kael followed, letting her guide him, their thoughts braided like strands of light and will. With Kael's presence as stabilizer, Nova entered the heartweave, the inner core of Xirion thought, and offered herself not just as heir, but as healer. Her consciousness flared in all directions, singing the song of the now child, now queen, reaching into the hurt of her people, offering forgiveness for betrayal, peace for division, hope for entropy. The lattice responded, not immediately, not all at once, but like a great tide changing direction. The core stone pulsed once and then again, brighter each time, until Kael felt as if they were standing within a star made of memory and love. But then, the strike came. Unseen in the physical world, it pierced through the psychic plane like a blade of cold entropy, a shard of anti-thought, hurled into the core by the Rel exiles, a final desperate attempt to corrupt the heir's mind, to poison the lattice before it could heal. Nova screamed, not aloud but across the psychic realm, and Kael, without thinking, took the strike into himself. The blade tore through his mind, unraveling identity, memory, form, until there was only pain and dissolution. Yet even as he fell into nothing, he held on to one thing, her. Nova. Her name, her light, her trust. He clung to it, and in that final moment of collapse, the medallion that had once saved her flared to life in his chest, merging with the core, rewriting the rules. Where Kael fell, he rose again, not as he was, but as something new. The lattice accepted him, not as Xirian, but as bondmate to its heir, as a second anchor. Two minds, one unity. The core stone surged with brilliance, and the attack was burned away like shadow before sunrise. Nova's presence swelled with joy and relief, wrapping Kael in a light that made him feel whole again. And then, silence returned. But this time, it was a silence of peace. When they opened their eyes, they stood once more in the chamber, but changed. Nova's crown had fully formed around her, a halo of living light woven through her hair. And Kael was no longer merely human. His body was still his, but subtly altered, suffused with energy that hummed just beneath the skin, his thoughts no longer isolated but expanded, still private, but now tuned to the frequencies of shared understanding. The Queen stepped forward, tears falling without shame. "You have done what no one has ever done," she whispered, falling to her knees. "You have bound yourself to us, and we to you. You are not outsider anymore. You are eternal bond." The chamber filled with light, and the voices of the chorus rose in harmonic song, proclaiming Nova as anchor of the lattice, and Kael as her guardian beyond flesh, her chosen, her link to the stars beyond their reach. In the days that followed, peace settled over Xirian. The Rel insurgency was quelled not through war but through unity. Nova's ascension healed the deep divides, and Kael stood by her side, not as a ruler, not as a figurehead, but as a legend reborn in flesh. And the gift he was granted? It was not wealth nor power nor command. It was belonging, a place in a people who thought in light, who saw his soul and called it kin. And more than that, it was her. The girl he had rescued now stood at the dawn of an age, and when her hand reached for his, it was not with the need of a lost child, but with the eternal bond of someone who knew he had walked through death just to keep her light alive. Together, they would chart a future where no war could sever love, where no galaxy was too distant, and where no being, no matter how forgotten, was ever truly alone. For he had crossed stars to save her, and she had given him a gift beyond worlds,